We can
So,
make decisions. Between you and me, we can make decisions.
This is great. Good. We're off to a good start. So welcome, everybody. I am Barbara Tyran, President of the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment, WCEE, and we are delighted to have you here with us today for another in our executive series. Like many nonprofits in 2020, WCEE is offering virtual programming during these unusual times to continue providing value to all of you. And yet, as we all know, costs continue during these unusual times as well. If you would like to consider a donation to WCEE or becoming a sponsor, please visit our website, WCEE.org, and information will be available there to help you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today, it is my honor to introduce someone I have known for many years who has led a spectacularly successful career. Gloria Dittus is chairman of one of Washington's leading public affairs firms, Story Partners. She is a trusted counselor who provides strategic communications, executive thought leadership, and corporate positioning and messaging advice to members of Congress, cabinet secretaries, and business executives. Gloria founded Story Partners in 2010 after the successful acquisition of Dittus Communications, which she created in 1993 by FTI Consulting. Under her leadership, Dittus Communications was recognized as Public Affairs Agency of the Year, and Wired magazine called her the nation's first public affairs PR maven. Story Partners clients have included executive teams at Shell, HSBC, Home Depot, Dell, Intel, Microsoft, General Motors, Southern Company, Fluor, British Telecom, Playboy, Clear Channel, and other Fortune 500 organizations. By carefully aligning marketing and communications efforts across corporate enterprises, Story Partners delivers results by helping their clients protect and enhance reputation, weather and prevent crises, and favorably position leadership. Gloria has been named Public Affairs Executive of the Year by PR News, and the Washington Business Journal recognized her as one of Washington's 25 women who mean business. Gloria began her career in the United States Senate, but soon transitioned to Exxon's government affairs media team. In 1982, she joined Edison Electric Institute's Public Information Department and was Director of Government Relations from 1985 to 1987. Which is where we met. From 1989 to 1993, Gloria helped found and build the Direct Impact Company, a grassroots lobbying firm. Gloria serves on numerous corporate and nonprofit boards, including Aperio Beauty, Board of Trustees for Ford's Theater, the National Press Foundation, the Arthur Page Society, and the Public Affairs Council. Gloria will share her career journey, particularly her entry into the energy world and how she leads Story Partners today through our health and economic crises. We will have time for Q&A, so please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And with that, welcome, Gloria.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm glad you didn't say exactly how many years we've known each other, because then it would have dated both of us. But you know, Barbara was one of the first people I met at EEI, and we both were commenting on how many people from EEI signed up for today. So, you know, we both have fond memories of you know, our time in that EEI boardroom. So, thank you for having me, Barbara. So, would you like me to just give a little bit of my background?
Yes, please. If you just talk about your career and particularly what drew you into the energy world, and now particularly, I know we've talked prior to today's broadcast, but tell us a little bit about how you're leading Story Partners during this extraordinary time.
Yeah, so you know, I came to Washington like many people, you know, without a job, without a lot of contacts, and it was in the late 70s, and I had caught the political bug in college, you know, I majored in political science and sociology. It was a really interesting time. I was from Georgia, and Jimmy Carter was president, but I was actually a Republican and a supporter of Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan was running against incumbent President Ford for the nomination, and I became a delegate to the National Convention, and I was really young, you know, just really a teenager, and I was at the time the youngest woman ever elected to be a delegate to the National Convention. So of course I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I did know, but I had some great people that had sponsored me to get that. And, you know, I didn't have any money. I washed cars, and we sold donuts, and, you know, raised money to help send me to Kansas City, because that's where the convention was. And so that was my first political convention. So I caught the bug and I moved to Washington. And at that time, there were not, you know, there were not a lot there were no Southern Republicans. Everybody was a Democrat. And my congressman was a guy named Doug Bernard, and his mother was a mentor of mine in the Republican Party. She was sort of the grande dame of the Republican Party. And I went around the Senate, and I knocked on doors, and I walked in, and I asked for, that someone had told me, just go into any office where you have some kind of connection. And it was my first lesson on connections, because I spent every summer of my life in northern Alabama, you know, swimming and skiing on Wise Lake. And so I had, you know, relatives in Alabama, and I knocked on, you know, walked into the Senate office for a freshman senator. And, you know, it was all really about being in the right place at the right time, because I clearly had a Southern accent, and they needed a receptionist. So before I knew it, I was sitting in front of the chief of staff for the senator, and his name was Dan Dutko. And I don't know, those of you who are listening in, if you're old enough to remember Dan, but he was quite the force in Washington. He was from Texas. He chaired Bill Clinton's campaign. You know, he said, well, I see you're a Republican. Why would you want to work? And I said, well, I'm a Southerner. You know, and that was, you know, I had to learn how to message, right? I'm a Southerner first, and you're from a great Southern state where I have family. And I guess he liked the way I answered that question and my accent, because I got a job answering the telephone. But it taught me a couple of things. It taught me about being on message early, you know, having your story and your narrative straight, and making that work for you. So, you know, I worked there until he lost his seat. He was defeated at during a primary runoff, and that's the seat Dick Shelby has now. So I got to know Shelby really early. You know, my first days at DEI, I worked on a big bill that Shelby was introducing as a freshman senator, as a freshman House member, actually. So, you know, I went to work in the Senate, and the first thing that happened, I don't want to ramble on too much about this, but there were big gas lines. There was OPEC had been formed, and there was a shortage of oil supplies, and people's cars were pulled up in front of their gas lines. And my boss, who was, you know, a Southern Democrat, introduced a bill that said you couldn't buy gasoline except to go to work. And, you know, and I thought to myself, I don't think people in Alabama are going to like that. So I called my uncle, who is just a good old boy, and all he really liked to do was hunt and fish. And I said, Uncle Bradford, do you think if somebody introduced a bill that said you couldn't get gasoline except to go to work, And my uncle said, well, I'd just vote him out. And I thought, oh my God, I got to start looking for a job because my boss is fixing to lose his election, which is exactly what happened. I mean, he just did not have his finger on the pulse of the state. And again, an early message for me. So energy was at the very beginning of my career. And when I left the Hill, I went to work for Exxon Corporation, and my boss had been the energy writer for the New York Times. And I said, listen, because back in those days, you were sort of an assistant, right? You didn't just graduate from college and get a real job. You had to start out as a secretary and really work your way up. And I said, well, I'll make your airplane reservations and your lunch reservations, but you've got to promise me that you will, teach me about the public relations business. He had been the top energy writer for the New York Times. So if there was anybody to learn about it from, it was Bill. And he was highly respected by the Energy Press Corps in Washington. And energy was on the front page every day. And true to his word, he really let me follow him around like a puppy dog. He took me to lunches with him. I got to know all the journalists. I got to sit at tables that I probably wasn't supposed to be at, but that's because he invested time in my career. And I do think that taught me something early in my in my formation, and it's always something that I've tried to do for everybody that's worked for me. So when I left Exxon, and when I got ready to leave, I told him, he said, don't do anything until I get back. He was on a business trip, and he came back. He said, well, I'll help you. You'll get a better job with me than without me. And I was like, okay. And I've also done that. That was like great advice. And I've always told people who work for me, look, you'll get a better job with me than without me. So when you feel like it's time to go, come in and tell me and let me help you get the next great thing. And so, and going to work at Edison Electric Institute was really a pivotal part of my career. I was the spokesperson for the nuclear, used to be at EEI back in those days. And when the Chernobyl incident happened, I was the national spokesperson for that. So I got to learn a lot about crisis. And if there's one thing that in the utility industry is you learn about crises, whether it's a tornado, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's an ice storm, whether it's an incident with a plant, or a ruptured gas line, whatever it is, or an outage. I mean, there are outages all the time. You just learn to deal with crises. And I think that prepared me a lot for this recent pandemic. We represent a number of utility companies. Barbara and I were talking earlier, I've been on calls with, every 2 weeks on calls with the CEOs from some of the largest companies. And I've had to listen to, how they're dealing with the pandemic, how they're dealing with staffing, how we're dealing with a lower load. But at the same time, you have people who don't have the money to really, pay their electric bills. And, what do you do? How do you manage that? And how do you manage your business day to day when you've got a significant number of people who can't, who are delaying paying their bills? So during the pandemic, I've counseled and advised a number of clients on really how to manage through that. I just think energy for me was such a pivotal part of my career, such an important part of my career, and such a foundation of, issues that I worked on, because, energy prices affect manufacturing, they affect small business, they affect people's homes. And I knew every day when we were working on legislation that the legislation that we were working on had a big impact on Americans' life and had a big impact on American business. So I always felt that it was an important, I wasn't selling water, not that selling water is not great. I wasn't selling soap, but we were, I always felt like we were selling the American dream, because if you have good, solid, stable energy prices, then the rest of the economy functions very, very well.
That's a great story. Thank you so much. And as you say, Gloria, I mean, with gasoline lines running around the streets, why the importance of energy was immediately visible just to the average observer, much less those who were steeped in expertise in that area. It was a very important time in energy, and that's great that you were able to make your entrance into that professional field at such a crucial time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I have a few questions for Gloria, but I am going to welcome everyone else to please go into the chat and Q&A and submit your questions. We want to hear from you all. This is intended to be an interactive discussion, and we would love your participation. I'm sure Gloria would be very pleased to answer any questions. So feel free to submit, and I will get started here so you have some time to collect thoughts. So you've had over 30 years of public policy, communications, and political experience. Is there one event or one professional experience that you would say is the most meaningful to you? And can you tell us what that might be and why?
Yeah, you know, I get asked that question a lot. And I used to say that I used to think, and I still do think, that the experience that we had when we helped Shell Oil Company rebuild New Orleans after Katrina was really one of the most fulfilling experiences that not only I had, but also that I heard from my staff, because we had a big team of about 20 people that were working on that at any given time. You know, I love New Orleans so much. That is one reason why it was very special to me. But the things that we got to do to really help the community, I think go, you know, back to, you know, what Tip O'Neill said about all politics is local. You know, if you don't get it right locally, you got big problems. And you can look at what's happening today with COVID. If you don't get it right locally, you got big problems. And, you know, when we rebuilt New Orleans, we got to do great things. We got to, you know, they sort of tore up this local school system and rebuilt that, and, you know, really pushed charter schools out. And now New Orleans has got a great school system, where before Katrina, they really did not. You know, we put fishermen back to work. I mean, after Katrina, you know, there were lots of fish out there and the fishermen could work, but there were no ice houses on land for them to put their fish in. So the first thing that Shell Oil did, because Shell said, listen, we're exploring in the Gulf for natural resources. The least we can do is help the fishermen get back to work. And I learned a lot about that. So how did we do that? We built ice houses on, you know, all over the southern coast of Louisiana, so fishermen were able to go out and get their catch and have a place to store it, so then they could ship it out to all the restaurants. And the restaurant industry, so big in Louisiana, it was really, really important to make that happen. And, you know, New Orleans and Louisiana and that whole Gulf Coast supply fish to the entire country. So standing that up was really important. And the other thing that we did as part of our campaign, and it was called the Coming Home campaign, was we decided that everything we were going to do was designed to give people a hand up, not a handout. So we gave every Shell employee a credit card, and they could use it. It was $1,000, I think, and they could use it to spend on things that would improve their community. So if there were, you couldn't go into Saks Fifth Avenue and, you know, use that credit card to buy yourself some clothes at Saks. But if there were televisions, if there was rubble on the street that you needed to get picked up, you know, if there were windows out at a community center that you wanted to put some money in to, you know, help get that repaired, you could use that $1,000 for anything that would help rebuild the community. And there were no questions asked. You didn't have to get approval first. So we were really priming the economic pump in New Orleans, because we knew that what needed to happen in the community was, you know, to bring that economic pump back. And so, you know, I got to learn a lot about the combination of, economics and community development and how those, really, help raise everybody's standard of living and help you crawl out from a crisis. So, that was such a powerful experience, and it was a campaign that went on for a couple of years. We made a decision not to spend any money outside of the state of Louisiana. So any printing that we did, anything that we bought for the campaign, anyone that was engaged to help with the campaign, they had to have a large footprint in the state of Louisiana. Again, because not just Louisiana, but in New Orleans, because we knew that the economic pump of the community had to be primed to, sort of kick it back in gear. So as a professional, one time, one shot deal, that was really important to me. But as I've gotten a little older, Barbara, I've come to realize that the other piece that has really impacted me a lot has been to help people open doors, to break down walls, sort of to fix problems. And whether it's with their careers or their companies or their organizations, across the board, that has been the most meaningful to me. So like today, when people call me, people call me all the time to ask for help, and it might be to, could you introduce me to so-and-so? Could you help me land this client? I'm looking for a new job and I'm up for a job. Do you know anyone here? Sometimes people are calling me and they're trying to raise money, not for candidates, but for a philanthropic program. Aperio Beauty is a new skincare company, and we're going to put it on the map, and it's going to disrupt the skincare industry. And I'm excited to be working for somebody like that. So, after I sold Dittus, I was sitting on the beach and I would get all these phone calls from people that would be asking for advice and counsel. And finally somebody said, when are you going to get back in the game? And it really does give me pleasure to help people, to help people find jobs, to help people figure out how to get a promotion, to help people figure out how to get a client, to help companies figure out how to build their business, to help companies that are in trouble get out of trouble. That is as fulfilling as anything, and has lasted my entire career, because I can look around the globe and see people that have worked for me, that have done, or that I've gotten to work with, that are doing really great, phenomenal things. And that experience, I think, is better, than any one issue that you could work on, because it reaches into so many different areas and businesses and industries and philanthropy. And if you join a board, like I'm on the board of Ford's Theater, and we totally revamped the board. We redid the board, and now that board is, I've always said, if I'm on a board somewhere, you want to fix the board so it would be so hard. You've upgraded the board so much that it would be hard for you to join, at the next go round. And I think we've tried to do that. We did that at Wolf Trap. We did that at the Shakespeare Theater. We've done that at Ford's Theater. So helping people and organizations, achieve their dreams, whatever that is a real fulfilling, and I would do that for free. Fortunately, people pay me to do that sometimes for clients, but I think that's really fulfilling to me.
That's great. I'm so glad that you brought all of those examples forward, Gloria, because one of the things that's very important about you that's not part of your official bio is you have a great heart. And what you've just been talking about illustrates that in spades. I should also add that after Katrina occurred in 2005, and you were busy on that very worthwhile work you were doing down in New Orleans, but the word got around DC that you had taken a caravan of vehicles straight into the heart of the Katrina country with all sorts of resources and things to help people and people to help people. And we were all in awe, because as anybody who remembers from 2005 when that occurred, it was a really scary, horrific sight down there with a lot of suffering. And you showed a lot of courage to go right into the middle of it and try to address it with the resources.
It was great. And a lot of people helped on that. I called Billy Tozan, who was at Pharma at the time, and he got us insulin and medications, and a couple of nurses to go down. And you know, we reached out to the Home Depot, and they gave us gift cards to go into the Home Depot store and buy things like generators and flashlights and, you know, things that people needed, because they were not getting any federal help. You know, we called my assistant at the time. Her family had a plane because they own a bunch of small auto dealerships in the Southeast. And, you know, Mary Landry said, can you help us get like underwear and bras and panties for all these people who are living, you know, at the Superdome, and they just need basics, flip-flops. And so then we called Target, and Target in Kentucky, they went to the store, the Target employees, and loaded up 3 trucks and went and put it on my assistant's plane and flew all that stuff down to New Orleans. And we were like, Mary, where do you want it? And she's like, just bring it to my hotel. and so a King Air that was full of nothing but underwear, flip-flops, t-shirts, and bras, you know, ended up going to, I don't know where she was staying, the Days Inn or something. And, you know, we dumped it all at her hotel, and then she distributed it. So it really is fulfilling to be able to do something like that, you know. And I called the electric utility industry, which this is really interesting, because I was like, how are we had a bus, we got someone to give us a bus, and we were like, well, what if we get down there and we run out of gas? Because they were talking about all the gas stations were closed. You have to take I-20, you know, into New Orleans. So I called Southern Company, and I called Entergy, and I got the utility guys to say, hey, if we can't find gas on the road, can we come fill up at you? Because I knew they had fuel, and they said yeah. And then they met us all the way down when we stopped and spent the night, and, you know, they bought us all dinner and filled our big bus up with diesel, and we went on, you know. So, I mean, it does take a village. And, you know, that's the one great thing about the utility industry. And I think the energy industry as a whole, we have so much, in utilities, you're serving your community, and it really is all about the community that you serve. In the oil industry, you know, you're going out and you're drilling for oil in you know, natural reserves, and, you know, it's where people live, and it could be in an environmentally sensitive area. They want to know that you're good friends with the community, that you care about the community. And as long as you put your community and your customer in front of you, you will always end up doing the right thing. I mean, you will end up on the right side of any political argument, because you've put the right thing first. And I learned that from Southern Company and from my time in the utility industry. So I think that is, I think that's really, really important.
I completely agree. And thank you for sharing that story behind the story around all of that work that you were doing, that community work. It's really exemplary. We do have a question actually from one of our participants from EEI, which says, what is your biggest piece of advice for people just getting started in their careers in the energy industry?
So it's really kind of twofold. Number one, really learn everything you can. Don't just be the person. So I'll give you an example. At EEI, because I was a public information officer when I started there, you know, the reporters would call and they would ask you questions. And oftentimes the public information person would just flip that question to somebody else. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I want to learn to be able to answer the question and know what it is, know what it's about, rather than just be a conduit of connecting people, you know. Although connecting people is really good, I think I wanted to have a foundation of knowledge, industry knowledge. So I spent time hanging out with some of the smartest people, David Owens, who knew more about economics and energy than I will ever know. And you know, he schooled me on things. You know, Bruce Edelston was another really smart guy at EEI. He was another great economist, and economics was not my field. So really, building that reservoir of deep knowledge will set you up for the rest of your career, and I think that is so important, especially in a complex industry like energy, because the people that run oil companies and electric utility companies and probably any energy concern, they're all engineers and they're all smart. And, communications people, they're not so sure. Government affairs people, they're not so sure. They like people who have hard science behind them. So if you're in a softer science part of the business, you need to demonstrate to those who are from the hard sciences that you're not a lightweight, that you're smart enough, and that you understand it enough, to be part of the internal team. And I think spending some time and effort getting smart is really, really important, regardless of what industry you're in. But I think it's particularly relevant in the energy industry because there's so many engineers who are at the top.
Thank you. Very, very wise advice. Thank you. We do have a follow-up question to the one that was just asked, and I do continue to encourage all of you watching, please do submit questions. We would welcome any of them. I'm sure Gloria would love to hear from you as well. So here's the follow-up question. What is your advice for mid-career professionals, especially those looking to kickstart their careers?
I think for mid-career, one of the things that you probably, you've got a good base of knowledge, you've probably developed a reputation. I think there are a couple of things that you need to do if you haven't done them already. You need to establish yourself in some leadership roles, whether you're leading an internal industry committee or whether you are, you're leading you put your hand up to lead a particular campaign that the industry is doing. You need to establish your leadership skills, that by the time you get sort of mid, what you want the people above you to see is that you can handle managing groups of diverse opinions, getting the best out of that group, and then achieving something, important. So whether it's a coalition, whether it's an external industry group, I gave big points to anybody who worked for me, not only if they joined a group, but if they stepped up and became a leader of that group. And I'll give you a good example. There's a guy I know who worked for Alabama Power, and he wanted to be the Alabama Power lobbyist. That used to be, they would bring people from the state up, and they would spend 2 or 3 years in Washington, and then they would go back to the state. And he tried to get the Alabama Power lobbyist job, and he didn't get it. And he said, well, why? I've checked every box. And they said, you don't have any leadership. You haven't demonstrated any leadership. And he said, well, if I do that, will I have a shot at the job? And they said, yeah. So he went back and he got involved with the JCs in Birmingham, and he ended up being president of the JCs in a period of about 2.5, 3 years. And the next time that job came open, he got it because he had demonstrated those leadership skills. That guy was David Wheeler. I know you remember David Wheeler, Barbara.
Yes.
So I think if you're in a mid-career, that's one really big important thing to do. The other thing I think you should do is to identify people that you're going to sponsor. And a lot of people talk about mentorship, and I think mentorship is really great, but it's really not about mentorship. It really is about, mentoring should be action oriented. It's about identifying people not only who will sponsor you, but people that you can sponsor, okay? People that you can help get into a leadership position, people that you can help get on a board, people that you can help get a client, help people you can help find a job, people who you can help make a connection that will advance their causes, helping people raise money. You know, if you're a lobbyist, raising money is real important. And I think in today's environment, it's probably more important than ever. But, you know, it's people that you can help, because once you sort of get mid-career, at some point, you're going to need their help. And, you know, putting a lot of chits in the bank, I think, is really important. And if you don't ever have to pull them out, that's great. I'm not a transactional person. Barbara knows that. You know, I put a lot of chits in the bank and I never call them. But if I ever needed to pick up the phone and call somebody and ask for some help, and usually I'm not asking for myself, I'm asking them to help somebody else. Everybody really steps up and jumps in to do that. So I think if you haven't built that army around you, building your army, building your own personal board of advisors, you know, building your, you know, brigade, your posse, whatever it is you want to call it, I think is critically important, particularly in mid-career. And it's hard because you might have kids, you might, you know, you have family concerns, but expanding your circle, I think, is critical in mid-career to sort of get you to that next level.
Good, thank you. We do, you've touched on this in some respects, but we do have a related question, which is, what are your thoughts about building a personal brand as a female leader in the energy industry? You've talked some about that, maybe in light of social media and how important the digital communications is today. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I actually, I have a whole talk on that that I probably should have meant, because some of my ideas are evolving as ideas should. I think building your own personal brand is kind of a buzz. You know, it's kind of been a buzz for a while. Here's what I think is important. So what I think is important about a brand is, you know, sort of, what are you bringing to the table? So I may not be the financial whiz bang, okay? But I may know how to get the financial whiz bang on my team. You know, knowing how to build a team, and you know, you think about the people that you want on your team. You might want someone who's a connector, someone who knows a lot of people. You might want someone who is a detail person, because whatever project you're working on has a lot of details. You might need to have somebody on that team that's got a lot of creativity, always comes up with great ideas. You might need someone on that team that's just a workhorse. If you build your personal brand with whatever your real hallmarks are, when your boss or you know, your boss's peers across your organization are thinking about who's the team they can put together, they're going to remember what it is you bring to the table, and they're going to pull you in on their team. I was on a lot of teams, you know, and when I worked at EEI, I was on a nuclear team, and then we defeated Ed Markey by 107 votes on the floor of the House. And then everybody was like, well, we want that team to work on our stuff. So because I was the PR person on that team, I got called to join a lot of other teams because we had a winning formula. And then when the guy from government affairs left EEI and joined the team to license Seabrook, he hired me away from EEI, and I helped license Seabrook because that team just moved out of EEI and went on to Seabrook. So building your brand, you should be built around what it is what's your niche and what you're bringing to the table. And you should do that through social media. You should do it through your work. Hold on, my computer's just saying I got a low battery, so let me plug it up. It'll take me 1 second. I'm so sorry. There.
No worries.
Let me just check and make sure that, yeah, it's all plugged up. So, you know, but you need to build the brand. It needs to mean something. It just can't be, look at me, this is my name. It needs to be grounded in your strengths. And you need to know really what your strengths are. knowing what your strengths are and what your talents are, and not being afraid to demonstrate them is a good thing. And it not in a braggadocious way. That was my grandmother's favorite word, braggadocious. She used to say, if it ain't bragging, it ain't bragging if it's just facts. It ain't bragging if it's just facts. So if you're just telling your story, and you do it, maybe you write a blog about, something that you've done with a philanthropic group that demonstrates your communication skills, or something that you've done in a philanthropic group that demonstrates your financial prowess, or something that you've done in a professional organization that demonstrates your ability to raise money. I chaired several big philanthropic dinners back in the day, and to this day, several of them have the fundraising has never been matched. It was their biggest fundraisers for the whole year. Demonstrating that to a group to a board, then when people start looking for people to tag you for another job, you've got a lot of credibility, and it's not that you're pointing your finger at yourself. It is that your work speaks for itself. And so when you build a brand, your work has got to speak for itself.
Excellent.
That's
Very
the
good.
bottom line.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you to all of you who are continuing to submit questions, by the way. They're much appreciated. And we do have another one. This is a bit different than the line of thought we've had. So the questioner says, what's your advice on creating a storyline for an audience on a boring or gloom and doom topic to energize them? Climate change related topics tend to be dry and depressing. Would love to know how to make it engaging.
Yeah. Oh my God, I've had to do that my whole life. There's nothing, nothing more boring than building a nuclear power plant. And when we were building Seabrook, we had a story back then. The biggest plane, that we were worried about was an F-15, and so the storyline was how you could talk about how strong the containment dome was, but when you talked about it could take a direct hit from an F-15 and not crack, that is what the storyline is. So what you have to do when you're talking about sort of arcane energy issues, which many energy issues can be arcane, and if you let the engineers go down their road, they'll be talking in engineer speak, and nobody really wants to hear that. You need to put it in terms that are relatable to people. So when you talk about electricity, it impacts this many homes, it impacts this many businesses. If you change, if you're going to change a regulation, it could increase rates to this many, for this many families. And what does that mean per family? The best thing to do is to figure out how you would explain it to your mom, or how you would explain it to your uncle. Maybe even how you would explain it to your kids, because that is really what you want to do, is have people have a way they can relate to it. We're dealing with a technology client right now, and if it were up to them, we would talk. Our whole conversation would be in tech speak, which would be great if you were in a tech trade paper. But to tell that story to Congress, you really need to talk about the 4,600 small businesses that they help, right? You need to talk about, the one small business owner that was able to survive the pandemic because of how that tech company enabled them to get other customers. So, there are lots of ways to talk about it, but I think the most important thing is to try to make it relatable to people, because that is where you will catch an ear. And Barbara knows this as well as I know so many of you on the phone. When a member of Congress leaves their office and goes walking toward the floor for a vote, what you want is for that staff person to have that narrative, that story about how it impacts one person or somebody in their district, or, you know, something that they can relate to, because that's the only thing they're going to remember. You know, it's a story that they remember. That's why Ronald Reagan was so great, because he had all those stories that people could remember. You know, Bill Clinton was the same way. Those leaders that have been very, you know, able to, you know, grasp the attention of the voting public are really good at that.
Great, thank you so much. We do have another question, a different kind of question also, which is great, which says, do you think the U.S. turned a corner on lowering emissions because of the pandemic, or do you think we will go right back to business and habits as usual?
Well, I do think we lowered emissions because, you know, no one was driving their cars, no, you know, and I think once the economy steps up, I do think that, and we get back to business, I think that emissions, you know, will, you know, once again reach those heights. I do, however, think if you were to ask me what changes have I seen over the energy industry over the years, you know, I think the two things are competition and sustainability. And I think people have embraced the concept of sustainability. And that's probably the biggest change that I've seen. That's being driven very generationally. So some of the older crowd does not embrace it as much, but I think that you can see the companies that are, you know, diligently, we've got a mining client right now that is, you know, putting out their first, you know, ESG report. I mean, you know, you just didn't hear about that coming from a mining company, right? So I think people are very aware of their impact on planet Earth and aware of, you know, how each and every one of us has a role. But I do think once that we get back to business, I think emissions are probably going to go back up because, you know, the economy's not fully loaded right now. But I think that the issue of sustainability, you can look at what Google's doing. You know, Google hired a young woman who I was a great sponsor of and a great mentor to be the head of their sustainability for Google. They had never had that position before. She led that sustainability issue for the Obama administration at the Pentagon. And she's doing a fabulous job. When large corporations, you know, large corporations start grabbing that issue and making fundamental internal changes, you know, what I didn't realize when I worked at a trade association and before, you know, I started having a lot of corporate clients, those corporate clients, you know, everyone talks about how they just plan for the next quarter, but, you know, we used to work with the CEO of Shell every day, and Marvin used to tell me, you know, we're pricing carbon 20 years out because our investment decisions are 20 years out, and we're making those decisions today. So we're pricing carbon. Everybody else may not be pricing it, but we're pricing it because we believe that that's where we're going. So, you know, when you have the CEO of a major oil company, you know, talking about that, I do think at the highest levels, the issues of sustainability have been embraced by the majority of corporations. And, you know, one of the biggest things I think you'll see was probably going to be sustainability in the fashion industry. I think that's the next big industry that's going to get hit with this, because you just can't keep making clothes, you know, and using those natural resources to make clothes and all those materials and all that energy that goes into that and just see them in a pile in a landfill, you know, at the end of the day. So I think, you know, I know I'm rambling on that, but I you know, I do think sustainability has crossed over into industries and the concept.
So you've actually just teed up beautifully the next question. And so it was the perfect segue. The next question is, how important is image for women to be taken seriously? And I assume that would be physical image as well as other components of an image.
Yeah, you know, I think you should be authentic. Okay, so I'm very serious, but everybody who knows me knows I have a good sense of humor, and I've always got a smile, and I do joke around a little bit, well, probably a lot, but I think the image that I would recommend women wrap around them stronger than anything, and I did it. I think it was because of the way my mom and I was raised by my mother and my grandmother. And so they gave me a lot of confidence. And so when I started being in rooms and I was the only woman, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to sit at the table. I just sat at the table. And Barbara remembers it. I sat at the table when it was like, what does she think she's doing sitting at that table? I just sat there. You know, I had confidence. It wasn't sort of look at me. It wasn't overconfident, but I think men have a lot of confidence. You know, I can't tell you how many women, like, I would really love to apply for that job, but I just don't have the credentials. And if it were a guy reading the same thing, it's like, I may not be able to check all those boxes, but I can do that job. You know, I think the image that you want to portray is a confident, assured person who, if you don't know the answer, you are smart enough to figure out how to surround yourself with the people that do know the answer and to build the right team. You know, I don't think you want that confidence as though she thinks she can do everything by herself, because nobody wants that person sitting on a board. Nobody wants that person in a management structure. But, you know, reminding yourself that you're strong and that you have talents, and that, you know, that you're not afraid to shine a light on them. Not that, hey, look at me, I'm so special, but figure out smart ways to demonstrate those. Do you think that answers the question, Barbara?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's excellent. Absolutely. And we have just a few minutes left, Gloria. So I'm going to ask the final question. We've talked a lot about energy and your career as a successful leader in the energy world, but we haven't talked about the world of business. And you've actually created and then sold a number of businesses very, very well. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to create a business, and then how could you determine when was the appropriate time to sell and move on to the next venture?
So, you know, when I went into business, when I started Dittus, there was only one other female-led firm in Washington, and that was a woman named Ann Wexler. Mm-hmm. She had worked for Jimmy Carter in the White House and had been, you know, one of his top advisors. But you know, she and her partner, who I'm totally blanking on her name right now, Barbara, if you remember her.
Is that Ann Lewis?
Sheila Tate.
Sheila Tate. Okay.
It was Ann Wexler and Sheila Tate. And Ann Lewis always did campaigns, you know, but these women they started consulting firm, you know, and Ann, I just thought the world of her. She was serious. She was smart. People called her. She was respected. And when I started Dittus, I literally called her and said, would you mind if I called my company the Dittus Group? I don't want to, because her firm was called the Wexler Group. And she just laughed and said, well, sure. I bet she thought, well, isn't that cute young girl, you know, whatever, you know. But, you know, I think, again, not being afraid to call her and ask her a question, you know, that she could give me some advice and counsel on. When Heather Podesta started the Podesta Group, started Heather Podesta Partners, whatever her original company was. She came to me and we had shared a client together, and she said, what do you think I should call my group? I'm gonna start a firm. And I said, well, if I had it to do all over again, I wouldn't put Dittus Communications on the wall, because then it doesn't give the senior people who work with you the attention and respect that they get. And the bigger you get and the harder it is, the more it falls on your shoulders and your shoulders alone. So it would be nice to spread it out a little bit and have another name. And she called it Podesta anyway. And then when she changed it to the Invariant Group, she sent me a text and she said, I'm finally doing what you told me to do to begin with. So, you know, you learn a lot along the way. But so, you know, I think I always knew I was going to start a business. So I, you know, started Dittus, and I really didn't start it with any intention to sell it. When we started Direct Impact, we did start it with an intention to sell it. They never planned to run that, but I didn't do that with Dittus. We were going to run it. We were going to, if somebody came and wanted to buy us and it made sense, then we would sell it. And everybody tried to buy us, and we just said no for years. And then finally someone came and offered us this crazy amount of money, and the ability to, you know, do global work. And it just made a lot of sense for us. So, you know, I think you have to know you have to have a vision if you're going to build something. You can't sort of have one foot in and one foot out. You've got to make a commitment. And then you have to sacrifice. Like, I didn't have a new car for, I don't think, a decade. You know, I didn't give myself a raise for probably a decade. You know, I poured all the money back into the firm, and there were many times that there were other people in the firm that were bringing home more money than I was, you know, because that was important. So I think you have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to have a plan, and you have to have some people that you know are willing to sponsor and stake you. And I had great people that, you know, sent me business and trusted me, but they knew I would never let them down. You know, they knew that if they gave me their, you know, their business, that I was going to succeed, because I was not going to. Healthy fear of failure is another really important thing if you're going to start a business. Be terrified to fail. You know, I was terrified to fail. I know people say, oh, you should have a business and then you should fail because then you'll learn a lot. I'm just too terrified to fail. John Breaux was terrified to fail. Billy Tozan was terrified that he was going to fail and they were going to send him back to the bayou. So, you know, I think a healthy fear of failure is important.
And your success has been anything but any twinge of failure. So you have totally escaped any element of failure. And in fact, our chat room—
But it still scares me every day.
Our chat room is filling up with glowing compliments about you and
good,
thanking you for your time. And I want to echo that as well, to say thank you so much, Gloria Dittus, for being here with us, for inspiring us, for encouraging all of us, and for sharing your story with WCEE and our community. We're so grateful to you for all you've done. Congratulations on an awesome career and being an awesome human being as well. And
well,
thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for having me. And I'm just sorry we couldn't do it in person. But this new Zoom thing is a good substitute.
It is, absolutely. Maybe one day we'll all be able to gather again and do it in real time in person. But until then, I want to thank everybody from the WCEE community for joining today. Thank you for your support of WCEE and our virtual programming. If you have any suggestions about how we can improve the value of the organization to you, please don't hesitate to be in touch. We, again, really are grateful to all of you. Please stay safe and be well. And once again, thank you, Gloria Dittus, for an extraordinary hour together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.